Yeah. By the time you come next,
Yeah, I'll be wearing New
next
Balance
episode,
shoes, like the old school New Balance shoes. I'll be wearing.
you try to look young. You wear Jordans like the kids.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Saw those.
Oh, sorry. So I didn't realize
I'm glad
that.
You
Yeah,
saw
I didn't
those.
realize
Thank
that.
You very. Oh, you're wearing, bro. I didn't even know. And by the way, like and subscribe, please.
Amen. Okay, so this is Real Disciple. I'm here with Pastor Garett King. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And so what I wanted to do is jump straight in. And many people will know you who's watching this. You're doing revival for us, powerful revival. But what I like to start with when I speak to someone is ask them, how did they get saved? Now, obviously, you grew up in church. Your mom and dad came to salvation in the Tucson church, got saved. Did they meet in the Tucson church?
No.
Were they together already?
No, they were already together.
Okay, and then they came and got saved. And then did they have you before they came to church?
No.
Did they get married in the church?
No.
Okay, so they're married before?
Yeah.
But they had you before or after they came to church? After, okay. So how did what's your journey like that you grew up in church, in the Tucson church, and how did you get saved? How did that work? I know it's a long thing, but
my sister, my older sister, she's about 3 years older than me.
Yeah.
She was the first baby born in the Tucson church. So
really?
My mom was 8 months pregnant with her when they got saved.
Okay.
And they got saved because somebody broke into the church and stole a bunch of equipment. And my father was working at a wrought iron shop. And Pastor Warner went into the shop to get, hey, we need some wrought iron security bars.
Oh, bars. Okay, yeah.
Some bars on the windows to secure the church so it doesn't get broken into. Well, when Pastor Warner was there, he was witnessing to my father's boss. My father was listening. And his boss was, kind of, when Pastor Warner rolled out, he was mocking him, Can you believe this man in the wheelchair telling us we need to come to church? And took the flyer that Pastor Warner had given him, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash can. But so as soon as my father's boss left, my father grabbed it out of the trash can, opened it up, went home. Him and my mom had been looking for something. And so they ended up going to a concert that night. But there's a bunch of kids in the church, just teenagers. They were all teenagers. And so they started walking in, saw all these teenagers, felt awkward, and then turned around to walk outside. And as they're turning around, there was another couple that they had met that week in a pregnancy class, a Lamaze class, of one of those breathing classes that they had been in. And they were coming in as my parents were leaving out. And so they're like, hey, and, they ended up corralling them back in, and bring them in. And then my mom gave her life to Christ that day. And then my dad shortly after that. And then my sister was born. So 3 years later, you fast forward, and I was born. So I grew up in the church, didn't know anything besides church. I was really good at, doing what I needed to do. I think from the outside, people would have thought, this guy's got, this kid's okay. Then I started getting a little bit out of line in my teenage years, prior to my teenage years, 8 or 9 years old, and then started, kind of, my father and mother started the children's ministry with another couple in the Tucson church. So they pioneered that with another couple, Herb and Sharon Unruh. And then a bunch of other couples came in and joined with them, helped them. And so I grew up in the children's ministry. My father was the children's church pastor. And because Pastor Warner didn't have any children, I was kind of like the pastor's kid, my brother, my sister, myself, that the people would reference. And so that comes with, pressures of, different sorts, unintentional, but just pressures. You gotta, behave because you're the pastor's kid, and if he's teaching our children, then his children better be in line. And I was not quite in line. My brother was perfect, still is. My sister was an angel, still is. and then I came along. And so I tell my parents that I taught them everything they know about parenting nowadays, because my brother and sister were too simple. So I had to teach them, how to parent a difficult
How
child.
so they could relate to normal
parents that have to
yeah.
go through.
So you did them a service,
you're
obviously.
Welcome. You're welcome, Mom and Dad, if you're watching.
You are so magnanimous. So,
yeah, I'm telling you,
so gracious, man. You're amazing.
It was a tough job,
even as a child, man.
No, I remember one time a guy. I was acting up in children's church, and so this guy pulled me out of children's church, and he's laying into me. And I said, "You can't tell me what to do. My dad owns children's church."
Oh my days!
And, so yeah, that didn't go over well. And so yeah, that was my attitude growing up. And so then I got into my first year of high school, which would be around 14 years of age. And I was playing a game. I really enjoyed the high school life. I really enjoyed getting away from church and having that kind of social life. I met a lot of friends that were older, and started doing some things I shouldn't be doing, and ended up getting in a really tough situation that I realized, I kind of realized, wow, if you keep going like this, you're going to be a dangerous man in a couple of years, and it just kind of caught my attention, and I had to get my heart right. Repented. There was a salvation moment, a genuine salvation
That would have been about 14?
14 years of age.
Okay, yeah.
Yep. And and then after that, I just said, well, what's the point? What's the point of not going all in for God? It was just, I was at an altar shortly after that. When I gave my life to Christ, I would visit the altar as every service, whether I needed to or not. And I was at the altar one day, and God spoke very clearly to me that I was going to be a missionary in Africa.
How old was you then?
14.
14. Wow.
Yep. And so, that doesn't happen to a lot of people. That's not a common thing. And it's hasn't happened to me, frequently in life. But I think God had to give that to me because I have this, I'm always just shooting at things, I'm always just, I want to do something. I think God had to give me a focus.
Yeah.
He had to give me something to do, to focus my life on.
Yeah.
So then I started, missionary in Africa. I'm 14 years old. So what exactly does that look like? Well, that's a big project. If I'm going to get there, then I have to be a pastor first. If I'm going to be a pastor, then I got to get married. If I'm going to get married, then I should probably get a job and a car so I can pick her up, So it just took on a very practical sense for me. Let me get my life in order. And so from the age of 14, I started getting my life in order, and I started aiming at what I felt God wanted me to do with my life.
Would that have been quite unique even from a church perspective? Like, because as you grew up, by the time you're 14, there's a lot of kids in church your age. You would have had a lot of kids in church. Though you said your family were the first, but you would have had a lot of kids. Was that the culture of all your friends at that time, or would you say no? That was quite unique.
It was unique.
I'm sharpening my life for this goal.
Yeah.
Where maybe other church kids are. How did you process that?
It was unique to the point where there weren't kids my age I could really hang around anymore.
Okay.
As I started getting really serious about God, my friends became older and older.
Yeah.
I was hanging around, I spent a lot of time with the youth pastor, Pastor Ed Gutierrez.
Yeah.
Him and his wife, Julie, took me in and really, really helped me. There's something that happens when you're a teenager where you stop listening to your parents and you start listening to other authority voices, and they happen to be a great authority voice in my life that really just kind of helped me. And my parents were, they were aware enough to realize, like, okay, he needs this, and they kind of pushed me that direction. Go ahead and spend some time with them. And so I would go and open the church with him, and I would spend the night at their house, and he had a newspaper route, and we would throw newspapers at 3:00 in the morning, and then get up at 5 and open the church for prayer. And it was just this grind.
Would you say that from that, listening to it, obviously there's an age difference, so it's not as clear cut, but it's almost like your parents, your dad and your mum are like, we're going to be your parents, and we're going to let this person disciple you.
Absolutely. And that was key.
So I don't have to disciple you. We know the Father is some type of discipleship, but not in a
ministry sense.
Yeah.
I can just be your dad. I can be your mom. And this
guy can disciple you, and I'll
can deal with you on hard things. And what was so good is that when Pastor Ed had to correct me, they were behind him 100%. They didn't fight against him, even if they didn't understand what he was saying. And then that turned into, from Pastor Ed, when I was between 15 and 16, I can't remember the exact age, Pastor Alvin came back from Sierra Leone. So it would have been 95 because he went there in 89. So 95, he came back from Sierra Leone and he evangelized for the first year.
Yeah.
Well, I had seen one of his disciples preach at the boot camp, Peter Dorr. And, as a 15-year-old young man, that was one of the greatest preachers I had heard. And Peter Dorr is a phenomenal preacher.
Oh, yeah, he's OG.
And he's so clear. And I'm sitting there thinking, this man has never been in America, and yet he's speaking to me on a deeper level that transcends culture. He for the first time, he just saw doors opening automatically at the airport. That's where this guy's coming from. And yet he's speaking to such a deep part of me. It was resonating with me. And I thought to myself, this is a real disciple. Like, this man is a disciple, and I need to get around the guy who made this disciple. And so when Pastor Smith came back to evangelize, my first thought was, how do I get around this guy? And I had to barge my way into his life. And so I told him, I said, hey, I got a car. You travel a lot. Can I pick you up and drop you off at the airport? Every time you go out of town, I'll pick you up, I'll drop you off from the airport. He was like, yeah, sure. And so that's how our relationship started. And from that, it's grown into an amazing friendship over the last 30-something years. But he was such a crucial part. So Pastor Ed and then Pastor Smith. And then that kind of led me to Pastor Warner, if you will. So I've always had Pastor Warner in my life. But Pastor Warner, when you're a kid growing up in his church, he's a very deep man, you know? And so, you're not necessarily in tune with or have the capacity to
absorb everything that he's laying out.
So he's that guy way up there. He's the guy on the stage.
Not only that. Let me interrupt at this point. At 15, 16, estimate, how big you reckon the church would have been then? Tucson Church.
Maybe 500.
Yeah. So, a guy who's got 500 people,
right?
Multiple churches out, leaders in the making.
Yeah.
There's only so much time you have for the youth.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's why he had a youth pastor.
Yeah.
Right? That was the youth pastor's job. And so, but Pastor Ed and then Pastor Smith. So when Pastor Smith became assistant pastor, I had just gotten married. So up to that point, Pastor Ray Ruby was the assistant pastor.
Yeah.
And then in March of 97, Sarah and I got married.
How old would you guys been then?
18.
Both of you 18?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was critical too. I don't want to skip over that. That was a critical part of my development as well, is that when I met her when I was 15. And she became like, she didn't come from church background. So she wasn't like any girl I'd ever met that was saved.
Yeah.
She wasn't a church kid. She came from a very broken family.
Yeah.
And so, and when she met Jesus, she just like fell in love with Jesus. She had been so hurt by men, watching men hurt her mom and her sisters. And she was like, I don't need a man. I know that. But then she met Jesus. She's like, this is what I've been looking for. Amen. And so it was so powerful. Her relationship with God was so deep, so quick, so real. And it was like, I want that, and the first time I met her, I had seen her before, but the first time I actually met her, I was set up by a friend of ours, and she said, oh, this girl likes you, and she wants to meet you. Well, Sarah, number one, didn't like me. She didn't even know I existed. She'd never seen me before. So the girl walks me up to Sarah in the sanctuary there in Tucson, the old sanctuary, and says, Garrett, this is Sarah. Sarah, this is Garrett. And so I'm expecting a girl who likes me, you know, maybe like, you know, timid and shy, you know, her eyes wandering, darting back and forth. Well, it wasn't her. She was looking for someone, and I'm there, and she's, oh, nice to meet you, and, you know, we shake hands, whatever. And she's, like, looking around, and I'm thinking to myself, like, this does not look like a girl who's into me, you know? And so I left that night. I got into my parents' car, 15 years old, and I said, I just met the woman I'm going to marry.
At 15?
At 15. It was profound. I again, that doesn't happen. These things don't happen. But I think God knows us. God knows our personalities. God knows our proclivities. God knows what we need.
Do you think there is also, though, and this is my, well, I think there's scripture for it, but do you think there is a grace on children whose parents serve God? Meaning there's these things that, there is an advantage to being in church and having your children in church.
Absolutely.
And so it's not a guarantee, but there has to be some sort of grace where we're like, you know, things are happening. This is different, because my observation of sometimes children that are born in church, and it can be like, they don't have that, you know, I had a tattoo of a tear under my eye, you know, I'm OG, I was doing a drive-by shooting, the car flipped in the air. It's like this gradual kind of thing. But as a church kid, as you lean into God, things start to really, you're reaping the benefits of what your parents have sowed.
Absolutely.
So there's these things that we're like, what? So soon? Like, how is this happening?
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm reaping something that maybe I haven't sowed as well.
You're reaping a decade or two of prayers that have gone up before God for you. You're reaping a foundation that has been laid over years of children's ministry and learning Bible stories. And so you have this basic understanding that a lot of people don't have. So you're not coming in starting with no knowledge of the Bible. You've been taught the Bible. You've been taught the Word of God. You've been taught the reverence that the Bible deserves. And so when you actually give your life to Christ and there's a conversion, when you're born again, your eyes are opened to this book that you've seen your whole life, that you thought was just stories, but you reverence it. And then all of a sudden it's real. It's living, and it's speaking to you. Like as an individual, you open it up and it's like talking to you. It's like it's known you your whole life. And so you automatically have an understanding of it. So I think you're reaping, and then you're reaping the blessing, right? I mean, just start from the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible. Everything is about your whole house being saved, your whole household. Yeah. And you even see it in the book of Acts. It's, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's Old Testament, right? Then Joseph, then the tribes, and like your descendants. And you read Deuteronomy. You read all of these. This is for you and your descendants and all those
your children's children. Yep. It's always.
And then you come into the book of Acts, and the new covenant is the same way. What happens is you see, and the whole household was saved. The
jailer, yes.
Right? I mean, there's 5 or 6, Lydia. I mean, there's 5 or 6 instances in the book of Acts. Even Peter says, this is for you and for those who would come after you, right? And so when he's preaching his profound message in Acts chapter 2. And so you see that that's God's intention. So when you raise your kids in the Lord, in the things of the Lord, there's no guarantee. Every kid has to make a decision.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, you up the percentage of that child finding their way in the Lord. And part of the key of that with my parents that I appreciated was my parents were the same people they were at church and they were at home. So the relationship with God they had at home was the same one at church. It wasn't like they went to church and became different people. I had friends whose parents were different at home than they were at church. Those friends are not serving God even to this day. And they struggled with that because they saw the hypocrisy of the home. And I never saw that. I just saw a mom and dad who weren't perfect, but loved Jesus, were faithful to church, ministered for the Lord, but they were real people. And they had their own struggles and their own issues, but they were repenters. They were people who would come before God and say, all right, God, you're fixing me, you're healing me, you're helping me. After 20, 30, 40 years of salvation, that was the testimony. And so for me, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but those are critical. And when you grow up in church, you have an advantage that if you'll take advantage of the advantage, then God could very quickly do things in your life that might take a little longer in someone else.
Yeah, definitely.
They don't have that foundation.
So, give us a give us a lineage of your ministry from a perspective of. We've kind of spoke about. We'll speak more about discipleship, but when do you first go into the ministry? Meaning, getting sent out.
Yeah, that's right. I was telling that story before I had to go back to Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah and I got married in March of '97.
Yeah.
And that conference, Pastor Smith took over the assistant pastor role in Tucson from Pastor Ray Ruby.
Yeah.
And Pastor Smith really wanted me and Sarah to come on as door directors.
Okay.
And so he talked to Pastor Warner. Pastor Warner agreed, and we came on as door directors 3 months after we got married.
Yep.
So we went right into the ministry.
Wow. So you're married, and in 3 months.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a thing now? I hear it a bit. I'm not going to bash people for it, but you hear it sometimes when people get married, they're like, it needs to be my time. We need to have our time for the next 5 years, and then we're going to think about.
Yeah, it is a. I don't know if it's a generational thing, but it's definitely a real thing. I noticed that the young people today want to live their life first for a while, and then they think, oh, I'll give myself to the Lord later, which is, I think, is very dangerous. The thing that I notice is you collect a lot of baggage along the way in those 3 to 5 years that you think you're going to have time, for yourself. And then you start to get attracted to things that are not. You can become more worldly than ministry minded. You could become more selfish rather than people centered. You become self centered.
Yeah.
And that's not going to help your marriage. Your marriage is not going to be helped by a self centered life. Like you already are two self centered people.
Yeah. And
you're coming together to form one flesh, and one self centered flesh is not good. So the thing for us that was nice is, we didn't have time to create problems for ourselves, because I was working a job where I was working 50 to 55 hours a week. And then I would get out of work and Sarah would pick me up. She'd have my clothes. We would change, go to the church, unlock it. We'd set up for the bands. We'd get out at 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night, go home, wake up at 5, go to work. We were so busy. We didn't even have time to screw up our marriage. It's like we're too
no
busy.
time to argue.
We're too busy.
Oh,
yeah, I'm too tired to argue. I'm too tired.
Just let it go.
So that benefited us a lot. Now, I do believe there's a principle in the Bible that, the Old Testament where, God
the first year,
God said, the first year, I think that God knows me better than that. So I think it's more individual. He knows me better than that. If he would have given me a year, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I'm just so grateful because God's led every step of the way.
I think as well, just to cut in there as well, I think sometimes when I look at different people's journey as well, though, I think some guys, they get married and they really going to have to learn about marriage and how to treat a woman and things like that.
Right.
They've never seen it.
Yeah, that's good.
Where you've seen it.
I've seen it.
You know what it is. You didn't. That's it. Yeah. You're learning the tactile, kinetic part of it, but you already have the theory in your head.
Yes.
Whereas
I've watched my father do it. I've watched my father lead. I've watched a good marriage.
So you've seen 18 years of a good marriage. Yeah. I mean, that's not even a degree. That's not even a master. That's something of a next level. I had not seen that.
Right.
I've never seen that.
Right.
I'm 50. I've still not seen it.
Right.
It's never been modeled in a home for me. So I'm making it up, pulling in bits from sermons, pulling in bits from discipleship. So I think sometimes with some guys, I can see how they may need, we're going to need a bit more time here, because you're going to run off and you already know how to do ministry. You know how to serve. You know how to be on the outreach, the impact team and all of that. But maybe you might need to learn how to really slow down for this woman here.
Yeah.
Because you don't get it yet.
Absolutely. And then what happens is they end up putting the ministry before their marriage.
And then the wife kind of fights the ministry, not because
she'll resent the ministry.
And then only because
having children, and then the ministry comes before the children.
Yeah.
And so because, we got to do this, and so there's an imbalance. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. If someone like that can have some time to settle in their marriage, to really focus on how do I be a husband, because so much of what we do as pastors has to do with marriages. I mean, you know how much counseling we do for pre-marriage, for marriage, for, after they get married and they're trying to get a divorce, and you're trying to talk them off the ledge of destroying their lives. And so much of what we do is centered around marriage. And if you don't have a good marriage, you're not going to be able to counsel that properly. You're not going to have a proper perspective of marriage. So you have to settle in your marriage to an extent so that you can be a good minister.
Oh, if you can't do marriage, your ministry is it's just not going to get off the runway.
Well, you're disqualified biblically,
yeah.
right? If you don't have your home in order, you're disqualified biblically. So marriage is your first ministry.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's emphasized enough. I think a lot of times we just assume it. And I do think I think the people who have gone before us, they had a natural understanding of that. Like it's, for them it might be like, duh.
Yeah.
Because that's what they just automatically have learned that.
Yeah,
but we have to be taught that. No. This is not ministry first. It's marriage first.
Yeah.
Right? You have to focus on your marriage. You have to get your home in order so that you can be an able minister. That all good, healthy ministry flows from a healthy home. There's no healthy home. There's no healthy ministry. You can be charismatic. You can hold things together. You can gather a crowd. You're not going to be able to make long-term disciples. You can actually pastor churches for 5 years at a time, move to another church, and people won't be able to detect the dysfunction in your home, so you can mask it. But if you're going to pastor the same church, and you're going to say some things, 10 years later, they're going to call you out on it.
Yeah.
You told me if I did this, this would happen.
Yeah.
And that's why I think when you are pastoring the same church over a long period of time, you become wiser as you get older, right? But some people have been pastoring, they would say, I've been pastoring for 30 years. But really, you've been pastoring for 5 years, 6 different times. Because you haven't stayed anywhere long enough to eat the fruit of your own labors, your own preaching. Your own preaching is producing sourness in people. It's not producing good things, but you don't know that because you don't see your preaching lived out in someone else's life.
And that's
you're not having to counsel 10 years later the very thing you told them to do. It didn't quite,
No, you're right.
And as you've been, and then when you're pastoring the same people for a long period of time, you start to go, I got to adjust that. Maybe
I see where that's producing.
Yeah,
I did
like
say that.
Producing.
But yeah, definitely.
I was off on that, but I didn't know better, and it's okay. We're learning as we grow, right?
Everybody, yeah.
But it's the ability to make those adjustments as you go.
Very good. Yeah, that's good. So, all right, so you get sent out at 20.
Yes, we went to Seattle, Washington.
And how long was you there for?
2 years.
2 years, and then you come back to Tucson
as youth pastor,
and you come back as a youth pastor. Is that the first time Tucson had a youth pastor?
Yeah, we had youth leaders before.
Yeah.
Just disciples that were watching over the youth.
Yeah.
But we hadn't had a pastor come back to pastor. And Pastor Warner, I mean, there was over 100 kids, teenagers at that point.
Yeah.
And he just felt he wanted a shepherd.
If you've got 100, that's bigger than many churches.
Yeah. He wanted someone to shepherd them.
Yeah.
And so Pastor Ed had done a phenomenal job of doing that.
As a leader.
And then he got sent out and because he grew into it. You know, he was a very good shepherd because he grew into it, but he was there for like 8 years or 9 years. Even though he'd never pastored before, he learned how to pastor us. And that's what made him so successful when he went out to pioneer a church. And then after that, it was kind of like, you know, I think we lost that element. Just we had great guys. They just didn't know how to pastor. They just never had the experience. And they weren't there long enough to grow into it.
Yes, I get what you're saying.
So Pastor Warner kind of felt, hey, I want a shepherd for the youth. So he brought us back on staff in 2001, and then we did that for 7 years.
7 years, okay. And while you were there, this thing of the missionary was always in you. Was you always thinking about it?
Yeah, it was always in the background.
Because you said at 14 you felt this.
Yep. So I knew I had to be a pastor first. So that was the first step. And then in 2005, so we had been 2005, it would have been summer conference of 2005 in Prescott. God spoke to me again and said, it's time to get your house in order. And so I was at the altar. I went back to my hotel room. Pastor Greg had put in the pastor's packet the places we didn't have churches. And that had always been my thing. I want to go somewhere nobody else has gone before. And I want to open a nation for our fellowship. That had always been a real burden on my heart. But by that time, when I looked at Africa, I didn't think there was much possibility left.
Okay.
It was part of the naivety of just my youth, but I just kind of felt like Pastor Smith did such a phenomenal job making disciples there. His disciples can go into any of these nations, and they can just kill it, man. I mean, they kill it. And what am I going to do compared to what these guys can do?
Because by that time, Pastor Peter Dorr had been to a few nations already, innit?
Probably 3 or 4 nations.
He had done a lot
and
by then.
And all of these guys. I mean, these guys are unbelievable what they can do when they go into a nation. They've been so well discipled, and they're such great men of God. I mean, they've just taken that discipleship and they're men of God. When you meet anybody out of Sierra Leone, you're like, that's a man of God. If you'll spend just time with them, their depth of them, and they're so humble, you would never know it unless you draw it out of them. They're deep wells.
Yeah, definitely.
You have to spend time with them, and when you do, you're like, oh man, I underestimated this guy. I'm always underestimating, you know. But when you spend time, you're like, whoa, and even now. The guys that Pastor Edward Safa has discipled, those men are now going into these other nations, and I have the privilege of meeting them and talking to them. And when I get to talk to them on the phone and I see how they interact, they're so well discipled and they're just such good men of God. It's not just that they know how to organize things or anything. They're just men of God. They're men of the word, you know. And so anyway, I'm looking at this and I'm just thinking there's no place in Africa for me. It wouldn't even make sense for me to go to Africa because we can do it with these guys so much better. So I started looking other places. And when I was looking at this place where we didn't have any churches, the nation that stuck out to me was Sri Lanka.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why. Just... I felt like it was like highlighted on the page. You know, it was one of those moments. So for the next 2 years, I began praying for Sri Lanka, praying about Sri Lanka. I thought about it. I studied it. I learned about it. They were in a civil war at the time, but it was seemed like it was coming to an end. And so I think it was probably January of 2007. So about a year and a half later, I talked to Pastor Warner, and I'd never talked to him about it before. And I went into his office and I said, I think God's calling us to be missionaries. And I think the time is coming soon. And it kind of seems to me it caught him off guard.
Okay.
And he's, where? I said Sri Lanka, and that caught him off guard. And because we hadn't even really, been in that kind of area. And so he said, well, okay, we'll pray about it. We'll see what happens. And then not a word for 4 months. Then he calls me up one day. We hadn't talked about it since I was in his office. And he goes, hey, you still thinking about Sri Lanka? I said, yeah. He goes, well, I've got my travel agent getting a ticket for you. I want you to go before conference. I want you to make sure.
Oh, wow.
I want you to make sure. I want you to see it. I want you to go there. I want you to make sure that that's where you should go. And I think that's probably knowing Pastor Warner, and from this point of view,
Yeah.
I think he didn't feel it.
Okay.
And he wanted me to not feel it for myself. He didn't just want to tell me, because Pastor Warner won't do that. He didn't just want to tell me, I don't feel it, Garrett. He just, so, all right, why don't you go? And I was on the plane, and I was reading a book, and I can't remember to this day what book it was, but the guy was talking about, it's just a phrase that stuck out, the divine yes. And anybody that knows where that book is and what that phrase came from,
Let us know.
what missionary, let us know.
Put it in the comments below.
And by the way, like and subscribe, please.
Amen.
Share
You
this.
heard it here.
Share this with all your friends and family. And then just robots if you want. It doesn't matter. Just get us likes and views.
There you go,
For
man.
the Real Disciple podcast.
What quality? Thank you for that. Don't worry.
You're welcome. Little plug in there.
Leave your account
I do
details.
that for free.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's for free.
Okay, thank you.
It's just
Thank you
part
for
of the
that.
podcast.
Yeah.
And so, so the divine yes. So I land in Sri Lanka. I'm all by myself, looking around, and I go down to this place called the Gull Face, and there's tons of young people everywhere, and it's right by the water, and it's these stairs that go down to the water, and I go and sit down next to this couple that are trying to mac on each other, and I start telling them about Jesus, and they get saved. And then I go to the next guy, and I pray with them. And I'm praying with 17, 18 people in that time.
Wow.
And then Dan Rubianis, who was in India, came down and met with me, and we went around. And, we're scoping it out. So people are getting saved. I'm loving the country. But I didn't get the divine yes. I didn't know what divine yes is. I just didn't get it. I just knew I wasn't getting it.
Yeah.
So I got on the plane. I was very confused, went back right before conference. It was literally the week before conference. So I didn't have a chance to talk to Pastor Warner until probably Tuesday morning, maybe Tuesday night at conference. And Pastor Warner said, well, what did you think about Sri Lanka? I said, Pastor Warner, I think it's open. I think it's the time. I just don't feel it's for us. And I didn't feel a divine yes. And he's like, oh, yeah, don't worry about that. He goes, what about the nation of Gabon? Never heard of Gabon. Didn't know what continent it was on. He could have made up a nation. I wouldn't have known better.
Could have said Wakanda.
As soon as he said, well, I would have gone to Wakanda. Are you kidding me? Yeah, so he said, what about Gabon? And as soon as he said Gabon, the Holy Spirit said yes. It was the most remarkable thing I've ever experienced. It was like immediately, yes. And that was what I'd been waiting for in Sri Lanka.
Was there any fear? No fear. There wasn't like.
No.
There was just
so I just said.
There was a peace.
I kind of blurted it out. I was like, yeah, we'll go. And he was like, well, but he didn't know what happened in me. That's what I'd been waiting for.
Yeah.
And so he said, yeah, you should probably talk to your wife about it. She'll go. I mean, we've been aiming at this for 2 years. Yeah, absolutely. He's like, do you know where it is? I said, I have no idea where it is.
So just explain where it is, like in
so
Africa.
Gabon
What is it
right
beside?
it's right underneath Cameroon.
Yeah.
And it's right above Congo Brazzaville.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so it's kind of coupled right there. Equatorial Guinea is inside of it. It kind of comes inside of it.
Okay.
And then so it would be considered West Central Africa.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't know. The funny thing is that I went home. And back then, dial-up internet. And so I had to wait. I had to go get my cup of coffee while it's signing on to the internet. Yeah. And so while that's happening, I'm looking up Gabon. And when I was 14 years old and God spoke to me and said, you're going to be a missionary in Africa, my reflexive response was anywhere but a French-speaking nation. And I don't know why I said that. But, of course, Gabon is a French-speaking nation. So as soon as I saw that, I just laughed. I just chuckled, that God's sense of humor. But yeah, so we ended up getting announced. That was 2007. We were there in February 2008, and then we were there for almost 6 years.
6 years, okay. Yeah. And then you come back and become assistant.
Yeah, then we came back and became one of Pastor Warner's assistants.
And you've been assisting for how long now?
11 years.
11 years, okay. So I think just break down, I think like we said, break down, how old was your kids when you went to Gabon? You got 3 sons.
3 sons. Joffrey turned 3 the day after we got there.
Okay.
So he was a young boy. Nehemiah would have been 5, and Zach would have been 8.
Okay.
So when we came back, I think Zach was at the end of his 13th year.
What did you think about having these 3 kids and you're going to Gabon? Like, what was your processing? I mean, it doesn't have to be anything, but how do you think about that? Like, you're taking your kids, because I guess if someone is thinking about becoming a missionary and they got kids, they might be like, how can I be a missionary if I've got kids? I don't know how it would be.
Yeah, I think you struggle as a parent with a lot of questions. How are they going to be educated? What if they get sick? Hospitals, healthcare, medical. So you struggle with a lot of those things. My confidence came from the revelation that if God called me there, then God was going to take care of everything.
Yeah.
So that was our confidence. And so the safest place you could ever live is in the will of God.
Yeah.
Right? So if I don't go to Gabon and that's the will of God for us, now I'm putting myself in danger.
Yeah.
If I go to Gabon and that's the will of God, then I'm in the safest place in the world.
Okay.
And that's what I watched happen.
Is that it sounds simple, but it's a revelation.
Yes.
Once you get a revelation of something, something that's, if you realize this building is being held up by solid concrete,
right.
It's a simple thing, but it changes how you are. Yeah. If I thought it was being held up by, lollipop sticks, I'd be like, oh, I don't know what's going on.
You'd be uncertain about everything.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
So that's what I've always grabbed hold of, is the will of God has an address. There's a place God wants you to be.
Yeah.
So you get in that place, you're fine. It doesn't matter if it's a third world nation. It doesn't matter if it's in the middle of a war zone. If God wants you there and you get to that place, it's going to be the safest place for you.
Yeah. So let's transition then from that. So we've got your ministry, we've got how you got saved, we've got your ministry. Let's speak a little bit about, because how old are your sons now?
Zach is 24. Nehemiah is 21. And Joffrey is 19.
And Zach is married?
Zach is married to Sierra, my wonderful daughter-in-law.
And he has 2 children now?
Yeah. My grandson was born last week.
Yep.
And my granddaughter is 19 months old.
So you're official
Who's
granddad?
Keeping track, though? Oh yeah, I'm a granddad.
Official.
But I'm a crazy granddad. This little girl, Bellamy Rose, she's the light of my life. She's got me wrapped around her little finger.
You're in real granddad mode.
Oh, I'm in such granddad mode.
You're real granddad
mode.
mode.
I don't mess around.
Though you don't look granddad mode yet.
I'm
but you're
gonna
soon.
work on it.
Yeah. By the time you come next.
Yeah, I'll be wearing New
Balance
shoes, like the old school New Balance shoes. I'll be wearing, I'm gonna get into the
Let's
zone.
not talk about New Balance shoes. Let's move on.
Do you like New Balance?
Let's move on.
Oh, you're an old man. That's
Let's
right.
Move on. Let's move on.
Right,
Let's move on. I am 50. I don't hide it.
Nothing against New Balance. I love every shoe.
I love every shoe. When you try to look young, you wear Jordans like the kids.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Saw those.
Oh, sorry. So I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, moving on swiftly. So you've got 3 sons. You've had 3 sons. Obviously, you've had to bring up your sons, and this is something now that I think is so important on parenting. You come to church, you get saved, you get into ministry, you even get married, you make your marriage work. But the latter parts of your years, obviously it's going to be your marriage, but it's really going to be a lot about parenting and bringing up children. And as I'm counseling older people now, in their mature years who have adult kids, I realize a big part of their battles through their salvation is what their kids are at. Like if your kids are in prison, that's a real struggle for you, isn't it? No matter where you are financially, spiritually, that's something hard for you to process. So I'm always saying now to people whose kids are like 5, 6, 7, 8, I'm like, look, you got to invest in these children now, because even if your ministry's doing well, you're financially doing well, if your kids are not doing well, that's going to be a big struggle for you.
Yeah, what you realize, I think, as you get older is that real blessing, true blessing, as the Bible describes it, is when all your relationships are aligned correctly.
Very good.
When your relationship is right with your wife, you are experiencing blessing.
Yeah.
And when it's not aligned right, it is anything but blessing. Your children, same thing, your pastor, your friendships. When there's any sort of relationship out of line, you feel that. It's a heavy weight. But when they're in line, you just feel so like that's real blessing. And so for me, the problem I have is that people think that you have to sacrifice ministry on the altar of your family, or you have to sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry. That you can't have both, that you can't have successful family and successful ministry at the same time. For me, the opposite is true, is that if you will focus on a successful family, you will have a successful ministry, because all real ministry flows from the family. It flows outward. My first disciples are my sons. Those are my most important disciples. If I can't get those three right, then I'm not going to get any of it right.
Yeah.
Because they know me more than anyone. They've seen me, they've watched me for 18 years of their life, 24 years now, right? They know me. They know my proclivities. They've seen me when nobody else sees me. I can stand behind the pulpit and I can be whatever I want. But when I'm at home, I am who I am, right? And so if I'm not the same man, if I'm not the same man behind the pulpit as I am at home, it puts question marks in their heads.
And it will make them question what you're doing on the pulpit.
Yeah, they'll be like, what
more
is this
than
guy
anything.
talking about? Yeah. They won't take anything I say seriously.
It's not like because you're good in the pulpit, bad at home, they'll be like, oh, well, I guess let's take what the pulpit is and put it home. No, what they do is they see what's at home, and then it will make them reject what's in the pulpit.
It fractions something, right? So there's no continuity in relationship now, because their father is now two different people.
Yeah.
And so for me, I don't over-preach myself. I always imagine my sons in the audience when I'm preaching.
Very good, very good.
And I know that they can call me on anything. They can call me on it. Dad, that's not how you really are. You don't really believe that. You don't live that. So I don't preach things that I don't live. And I've been very intentional about that I want my sons to be the best disciples. My sons, one of them, I know
they're all in church, by the way.
Yeah, they're all
in church, and they're all saved.
Yep, and they all love Jesus.
Yeah,
and my eldest son works in the media ministry. He's a graphic designer. He helps in our coffee shop. He does training for the baristas in the coffee shop. He plays keyboard on stage. My middle son Nehemiah, he plays for worship as well. He has a band, a music group. And then he's also worship leader for the college campus ministry, AO. Shout out to AO. It's my peeps.
Yep.
And then my youngest son, Joffrey, he handles a lot of live stream sound.
Yeah.
So he's the one running the live stream sound mix. Not running it, but he'll do it. He's part of that team.
Yeah.
And he's going to get married in a couple weeks.
So one has been married for, 3 years? 3, 4 years?
4
years.
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
One is about to get married.
Yeah.
Okay. And so give me some. Let's just mine this out a bit. What would you say to someone who, and I guess it goes across the board, girls, boys, but you've had boys, so you know what it is to bring up boys.
Girls.
Yeah.
Can't help you there.
So we just lost half subscribers. No. There may be something here. Stay on track. What would you say some of the key things at different stages that you would say about bringing up boys, meaning 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 teenage years, just whatever comes to mind?
Yeah. So my idea was I'm not going to try to raise good moral children. I'm going to try to raise God-fearing men. That was my goal.
So you got the goal.
I've got the
You're
goal.
starting with a goal. You're not just behave. You got a goal.
I've got a goal. And so the first 5 years is all about do what I say, son. Do what I say. Do what I say. Just do what I say. Then after that, you start to, depending on, it's not an age thing. Every child is different.
Yeah.
They start to ask questions, and you have to start to be able to answer it. And I think it parallels discipleship and church planting as well, because when a disciple is, 1 to 5 years old, they're just learning how to do what you do. They're learning how to act like you act and, be who you are. And then they start asking questions. Pastor, why do we do this? Dad, why are you telling me to do this? It's at that point where if you don't make a shift in your parenting or in your pastoring, that you are going to lose potential leaders. Because they're not asking questions because they're rebellious. They're asking questions because they need to know how you came to the conclusions you came to. So a disciple is a learner. So I've been saved for 31 years now, 32 years now. I am learning more now and faster than I used to learn. I'm always learning. I never stop learning.
Yeah.
I come here and I'm learning. I'm asking you questions. I'm learning. I want to learn. I want to keep learning so I can get better and better and better. And I want to become more like Christ. So I'm asking questions all the time. And a parent who doesn't understand that shift will just say, because I told you so. Because I told you so. Well, the longer you keep saying, because I told you so, the more you're stunting their growth, and the more you're getting that they're going to question you. Like, wait a minute, do you even know why we do what we do?
Yeah.
Like, I'm asking you a simple question, and it's not because I'm rebellious. It's because I really want to know how you came to that conclusion, because I need to come to that conclusion myself, right?
Yeah.
I can do what you tell me to do, but I actually have to learn why I need to do it that way.
Yeah.
And so with the kids, the 0 to 5 is that do what I say. Just do what I say. And then after that, when they start to ask questions, you have to start answering them. Now, as they start to approach the teenage years, there's another shift, and that is, okay, if I look towards 12 years old, I say to myself, I've got 6 years left to turn this boy into a man. 6 years, which means I better be very intentional, because I told them each the day they were born, and I held them in my arms for the first time. I said, son, I love you, but when you turn 18, you are getting out of my house. You're out.
Time to go.
Time to go. 18 years old. You're a man. And I told them that every year while they were growing up. They knew, man, if you're not going to college, I'll cover you if you're going to university, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to go to college, you can stay at my house. There's no sense in having to, use that expense. You can stay until you get out of university. That's fine. If you're not going to go to university, you're not going to live in my house. You know what I mean?
Have you stuck to that?
Oh, yeah.
At 18, they've all been out.
Yep.
And they survived and thrived.
Oh, man. Yeah. You got to throw them in the water and let them swim. They love it too. It's a badge of honor for them. It's a passing from boyhood to manhood. It's like I'm on my own,
Yeah.
And so
how was your wife with that?
Oh yeah, she's been on board. She's been
100. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying she likes it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, because obviously mothers are more mothering.
Yeah,
so
but she understands.
Yeah.
And she's not going to interfere with me raising men.
Yeah.
Like that would be against.
But would there be like a tear? Like, oh, my boy is going.
Yeah,
because I'm trying to work out how
she's a boy mom, bro.
Okay,
I mean, she's tough.
So
she might be tougher than me.
Okay,
yeah, she might be tougher than me.
Yeah, that's not hard. I mean, I'm only joking.
Wow,
joking. That was a joke.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
That's a joke.
It's fine. There's a shot, right? There's shots fired.
Well, you did mention my New Balance, so I've just.
Is that? Oh, you're wearing, bro? I didn't even know. Yeah. But those are. Yeah, no, those are.
No. All right, let's move on. Let's move on. So, all right, so what would you say was some of the what would you say some of the key lessons during that period of time, 12 to 18, that you thought, I've got to get this into them?
Yeah.
What are some of those key things?
I told my boys, there was a couple things. I would start off before they hit puberty with the sex talk.
Okay.
Yep. We're going on a walk. We'd take vacation every December. I like to reset before the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Take my family up to the mountain, 10 days, and I'm taking these boys out, and we're going to go for a walk. we're going to talk about some stuff.
Yeah.
And that's going to depend on where they are, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
ask them questions. I'm going to see where they are. And you know, sometimes it's not much, but all I'm doing is opening up the conversation and saying, and I told each of my boys, listen, I have had more sex than all your friends put together. I know more about this than any of them do. If you ever have a question, you need to ask me.
Yeah.
Because this is my territory right here. Your friends don't know squat.
Yeah.
Pornography is not real sex.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fake sex.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
acting stuff.
Yeah,
That's you know,
yeah.
that's not real sex. So you can't learn it there, and you can't learn it from your friends who probably never had sex themselves, or if they did, you know, they weren't very good at it. I have every answer you need to know.
I thought you was going to say, I'm very good at it. They're not very good at it. I thought you was going to say, and I am very good at it.
You could have said that. I could have. You know what I'm saying?
In my head, as you're talking, I'm like, this is going to be my clip.
This is the one that
Yeah,
you're going to...
I'm good at
This
sex.
is the short.
Pastor Garett King, I'm good at sex.
Yeah. Thank
Anyway,
God for editing.
yeah, we'll edit that. Don't worry. We'll keep your ministry for you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I told them, you need to ask me. So that opened up the conversation.
Do you think the beauty is you're having this raw, you can, as man to man.
Yeah.
You're having this so that it's not this.
And it's not, here's the problem, is the world's talking about sex.
Yes.
Their friends are talking about sex.
Yes.
But yet it's taboo for the parents to talk about sex.
Do you find that, though, with some, I know I keep it, but I have to, do you find with some parents, some dads, they don't do this?
Absolutely.
Because there is taboo.
Well, and it's, you know, it's shame to them. You know, I don't understand it. Sex is a beautiful thing. God created sex.
God created it.
And so inside the confines of marriage, it's one of the greatest blessings that God has given
You're
us.
glorifying God in marriage.
Absolutely. But when you take it outside, so I would
Yeah.
teach them the biblical perspective of this.
Okay.
I would tell them there's nothing to be shameful about this.
Yeah.
You're going to discover things about yourself. This is the way God made you. It's good.
Yeah.
And I'll help you navigate it. I will help you navigate. There's no shame in this. Ask me anything you want to ask me. I'll never look down on you. I'll never, you know, we will work through this. And look, if you stumble upon pornography, you need to tell me about it immediately and I'll walk you through it. We'll talk about it. There's no recrimination. We'll just talk about it. We'll get through it. We'll put safeguards up. We'll try to make sure you never do run across it. However, if you do, then I'm going to help you through that, right?
Being a parent, counseling parents, do you think that is one of the key things, is communicating to your child, I am open to everything that you want to talk about?
Yes.
Because it could be like, I just don't want to tell them.
I had this understanding that I want my kids to mess up while they're in my home. Because nobody's going to love them more than I will. So any discipline I put on them is going to be out of pure love for their own well-being, right? For their benefit. That I'm going to be very thoughtful and very loving in my discipline. And when they get out in that world, the world is going to discipline them in a way that is not loving. They'll end up in prison.
Yeah.
They'll end up in hard places. They'll end up getting a girl pregnant. They'll end up, you know, whatever, bound in pornography. Not me, man. We are repenters in my household. We are not perfect. We repent. We mess up. I have an argument with your mom. I spoke condescending to her. That was wrong. I am sorry, son, that you heard that. I'm sorry I spoke that way. I should nobody deserves. It doesn't matter who it is, but especially your mom doesn't deserve to be spoken that way. That's not the way a man speaks. I shouldn't have lost it. I should have held my stuff together, but God's helping me. And I talked to God about this and God's going to help me, but I want you to know that was wrong. So we're repenters.
You think you have to be secure in yourself, though? Because something you just said, if my children mess up, I want them to mess up while they're with me. Would you not say you have to be secure about yourself? Because if you create this environment where your kids just look perfect,
right,
and then they mess up later, it's almost like, oh, no, but it's not me.
Yeah, but in my house, they were behaving themselves.
Yeah. You get what I mean?
Once they left, you know.
Which is obviously a ridiculous idea, but you think there is that insecurity. You got to be secure about yourself to be like, yeah, my kids are messing up at home.
So I call it ego parenting. One of the biggest mistakes you make in parenting is when you parent with your ego.
Give us more on that. That's good.
Or ego pastoring, right? Meaning that my disciples have everything together. My disciples, right? And so my kids are perfect, right? So give you an example. I was pastoring in Gabon. We were there for about 2 years, had an evangelist come in town. And we were cranking, man. We probably had about 150 people at the time. And so this evangelist comes into town and he's, preaching. And I had just spoken to my ushers. Now, this is the grace of God. I'd been a youth pastor for 7 years. When I get to Gabon, all my converts are older than me. They're all grown men. I'm 28 years old. They're like 33, 34 years old, so they're all older than me. And so I had told them, listen, we had never had a revival before. So when the altar call happens and people come around the altar, he's going to start praying for people. You have to be alert, because if he lays hands on them and they get hit with the Holy Spirit, man, they might go down, and you got to catch them, bro. Don't let them fall, don't let them break their neck, So I'm like, telling them, you got to be alert. And then if you got somebody who's, some demon manifesting, you got to be able to pull them out so they don't disrupt the service, So I'm telling them, be alert. And so I gave them these instructions. They have no idea, never been in a revival. They're like, what's going to happen? And so the evangelist is up there and he says, let's everyone worship God, right? And so everyone just starts worshiping God. And so I'm not thinking anything of it. I'm just worshiping God. Well, we go out to eat that night. And the evangelist says, what's wrong with your ushers? Like, what do you mean? What's wrong with my ushers? And he goes, what's wrong with your ushers? I said, nothing. And he goes, well, I told them to worship God, and your ushers aren't worshiping God. They're not worshiping God. Are they even saved? And I'm like, are my ushers saved? Like, they're not worshiping God? So I'm 28 years old. I don't know much about ministry. So I go back the next day, and I get these 3 men, my 3 ushers, all older than me. I'm like, guys, what is wrong with you? The evangelist said, worship God. You don't even worship God? Do you guys worship? Do you even pray? Are you even saved? And I'm just like going into them, I'm going off on them and everything. And so then the one guy, the elder of all of them, Nicholas, he goes, Pastor, I just have a question. And he was real genuine, real sincere. And he said, so yesterday you told us to be alert, and now you're telling us to worship. But how do we worship and be alert at the same time? Like, do we do it with one eye, open, and we're worshiping? Like, how do we, and he was sincere. He wasn't making a joke. And when he said that, man, my heart was smote within me, man. And I realized, man, that was not appropriate. And I just apologized right then. I said, guys, I'm sorry, man. I got worked up about something. And what I realized was I was trying to pastor them with my ego. That this evangelist saw something that made my guys look bad, which made me look bad. So I'm going to show them, you don't make me look bad in front of these people, man. These are, So I was pastoring with my ego. We do the same thing in parenting. So what happens in parenting is if my kid acts up at home, do I respond the same way as when they act up in public? If my kids act the same way in private and in public, but I respond differently in public than I do in private, then I'm ego parenting.
Yes.
If my kid throws a fit at home and I'm like, but then in public, I'm like, and I'm yelling at him. Well, that's ego parenting.
Yeah.
I'm only responding because you're making me look bad as a parent.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have to remove your ego from parenting, and you have to understand that you're parenting human beings that were born sinners like you, and they have to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling like you did. And so there has to be a lot of grace. And if your ego can be removed from it, and it's not a reflection of who you are as a parent, it's simply, I'm going to parent them the way God calls me to parent them, and I'm going to do the best I possibly can, and I'm going to try to lead them to Christ in all honesty and sincerity, then you remove the ego from it, and now you have an atmosphere where people can mess up. So for me, I was always parenting 2 years ahead. If they were 14, I was parenting them like they were 16.
Okay.
Guys, you're going to act like this when you're 16? Like, seriously, dude? I mean, you're going to get a license in 2 years from now, and you're acting like this. That's crazy, man. Grow up, man.
Yeah.
And I would challenge them to be older than they actually were, because I knew by the time they're 18, I really in today's world, got to have them acting like they're 20.
Yes.
Right. So I'd make them pay for their phone. I'd make them pay their car insurance. If you got a license, you got to pay your car insurance. Pay the bills, buddy. This is how it works. You know, and so I was constantly trying to give them real life consequences. The older they get, the more real life the consequences have to be, right? So if you do this in the world when you're 20 years old, what is going to be the consequence?
Yes.
Right? And so I would try to think of an equivalent something I could put in the home so that they could experience this is just real life. Like if you don't pay your phone bill, your phone gets taken away. Oh well, you don't have a phone.
So what you're doing is you're teaching them responsibility
of life.
rather than, I think I read recently where people think parenting is about you always taking responsibility for your children, but you must teach your children.
Take responsibility for yourself.
You got to take responsibility. I'm only here to help you take responsibility.
That's right. I'm here to show you the way.
Yeah, but I can't do that.
I can't make the decisions.
What would be? So we're just going to run through some quick things. What would you say was one of the key lessons you learned from your dad that you've given to your boys?
I think that the number one lesson I ever learned from my father it would happen in elementary school. I was getting a lot of trouble. I was trying to get attention. I was getting a lot of trouble with the teachers, and it seemed like every day my dad would have to come home. He'd have to spank me, and he'd have to discipline me almost every day. And this went on for weeks. And one day while he was spanking me, I just blurted out, "How long is this going to have to last? How long is this going to happen?" You know, and he just stopped. And I was like, oh, is that all I had to do to get him to stop? You know, and he stood me up in front of him and he said, "Son, when you learn how to discipline yourself, then no one else will have to discipline you." And that hit me even at a young age. I think it's more profound to me now because the reason why we have to be disciplined, the reason why there's jails, the reason why there's credit agencies, the reason why there's whatever is because we don't discipline ourselves to pay our bills, to obey the law, to go the speed limit, whatever it is. If you don't know how to discipline yourself, then someone else is going to have to discipline you.
Yeah.
And so learning that is a man's lesson, right? That's a lesson of manhood. A mature man knows how to discipline himself. There's 1,000 things he could be doing right now, but I'm going to do this because I'm a man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to discipline myself to take care of myself spiritually, mentally, physically.
So when you learn self-discipline, that means it's a transferable skill set. So I mean, you don't get overweight because you know how to not eat donuts. Your cardiovascular will be fit because you can get up and run.
Yeah.
Your Bible reading will be there because you'll know how to read your Bible even when no one's looking.
Yeah.
Your prayer life, your finances because you know how to say no to things and save.
Yeah.
Your marriage because you'll be able to say don't look at that woman or don't flirt with that woman. You'll come to it's just like it's one of those transferable gifts or talents or character.
It affects every area of life.
Every area of life. If you can discipline yourself when no one was watching and no one has to tell you, you set your mind, I want to do that. If you go to uni, it would help you in school, in college to get a master's. It's not that you don't have the ability, but you don't have the discipline.
And it's not just something you say, it's something you do. My sons watched my discipline. Right, they watched me discipline myself.
So your dad
they
taught you.
They watched me when I would get a little bit. When I would get a little overweight, they watched me discipline myself and say, no, this is unacceptable. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
They watched me suffer in not eating and exercising every day, doing all that stuff to get back into control.
Yeah.
So they watched that it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfectionism.
Yeah.
It was just, hold on, this is out of hand a little bit. I got to rail this in a little bit. And that's what I teach them. When you feel that something is getting, you're not going to do everything perfect, but when you feel something is getting a little out of hand, discipline yourself. Bring it back in before it becomes a big problem. Deal with it while it's small so that it doesn't become big and derail your whole life.
So last question. What would you say is one of the things you've seen? You spoke about a few different things you could pull back on, but what would you say one of the things that you've seen is the most negative in parenting? Like, just don't do that. You've seen a consistency, seen all your friends grow up in church. Your friends have kids. You say, this is something that I think Christians can fall into quite easily, not to be judgmental, but this is what you have to, one of the things you have to be mindful of.
One thing, I'll give you two things, but I'll put them in one phrase.
Go for it.
Micromanaging hypocrisy.
Unpack it.
How about helicopter parenting hypocrisy?
Okay.
So parents that never give their kids privileges and responsibilities to mess up in their home. They keep them in this tight little knit. You're going to, these, I'm talking to a dad the other day. His daughter is 18 years old and she still doesn't have a phone. It's like, well, how is she going to learn how to use a phone properly if she doesn't have to learn that discipline in your home? So it's just this helicoptering, micromanaging type parenting. That is not healthy for the kid. And then the other side of that is hypocrisy. You're demanding more from your kids than you live yourself. You're demanding a level of spirituality and perfectionism that they don't see in you either. And so as a result, you suffocate them till they're 18, and then they turn 18 and they go rumspringa on you, which means they just go wild and crazy. Or the hypocrisy that we were talking about earlier leads them to look at you. You preach this, you live this, so God's not real.
Yeah.
Church is not real. Church is just a place people go to put on their fake, right? And so now they get disenfranchised with God and with the church, and then they just end up going off into the world. And hopefully down the road they see something genuine and they can have their own experience with God. But that micromanaging thing is crazy. When you get to 18 years old and you've never experienced any life. I wanted my kids to experience life. I wanted them to fail while they're in the home. So I had to let off.
Pull back a bit.
Every year we would pull back a little bit more. I'd give them more privileges.
Yeah.
If they did.
And things would go wrong. A little bit. Things will go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you've just got to allow. That's the process.
My kids made a lot of mistakes growing up, but I taught them how to work through it. We worked through it together, And the joy I have now is having 3 grown men that are taking responsibility for their life. My eldest son is an incredible husband, an incredible father. He married a great woman. I mean, that helps.
Yeah.
But he's just I just watched him. It's just so proud. There's nothing in the ministry I've ever done that makes me as proud as watching my boys succeed as men, watching them as fathers and husbands and seeing my grandchildren, just the joy that they bring to my life, So, I mean, what does it profit a man to build a big ministry and lose his own family,
Yeah, 100.
And you don't have to.
100.
You can have both. You can have a successful family life and home and a successful ministry parallel at the same time. They're not two separate things. They're one and the same.
You can have both.
You can have both.
Let's end there, man. You can have both.
But aren't we going to talk about real disciples?
Well, no, that is it.
Oh.
That's it, man.
I don't know. I feel like real disciples like an official something we got to talk about.
No, that's it.
Be one, make one.
Anointed.
That's your short.
That's it.
That's your real right there.
So, last thing. You let's give this down. So you've been married how long?
27 years.
And your wife, she really has supported you in all of these things that you're saying. That's going to be the big thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think she has to have confidence in your leadership. She has to have confidence in and that's another thing, right? She hears everything I say over the pulpit too.
Yeah.
Right? She's my accountability. Right? I can't be somebody different in the home than I am behind the pulpit. So she gains security from seeing me pray, read my Bible, be a faithful man. She gains security. If a woman feels secure, she'll follow you anywhere and do anything with you if she feels secure.
Yeah.
And if she knows that you're going to be a man of God, that even though you're going to mess up, you're going to repent, you're going to get right, you're going to take care of things. She knows you're not perfect. You're not going to fool her. But you're a man who's aiming your life at God. You fear the Lord. And that's the confidence that she can have to follow me anywhere around the world. If I said tomorrow, it's time for us to go to Afghanistan, she'd be like, all right, that's what you believe God wants us to do. She would do it because she would know I had heard from God and she's following. So it's the security that gives confidence that allows her to be free to just follow and your leadership, knowing that you are hearing from God, following God, and you fear the Lord.
Amen. Let's leave it there. Pastor Garett, thank you for doing Real Disciple.
Thanks for having me.
And I think what you've deposited with the family and raising boys is valuable information, man. Valuable information. And I think
maybe next time we could talk about Real Disciples.
No, we're gonna do that next time. Well, that's why we've got to have you back, man. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Thank you
God
very
bless you.
much.
Peace.